talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Hey, greetings and salutations, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our show, Dr. Judy WTF. And those of you who don't know what WTF really stands for, it's What the Freud. I'm your host, as usual, Walt Lusk, and in studio we have Dr. Judy herself, Dr. Judy Rosenberg. This is a call-in show, so feel free to call in. The number is area code 323-843-2826. That's 323-843-2826. And today we're going to talk about breakdown and communication. It seems communication is a real big thing, since sort of the byline of our show is healing human disconnect.
And speaking of disconnect, communication is a huge way that we break the connection, don't we?
There is. And that would be what, cell phones?
Well, yeah, for beginners, but just words, sticks and stones, right? And
definitely.
then there are words.
Yes, there are.
So we're gonna dive deeply into
words
break, what words make,
and what words make and what words break. And in addition to words, we will have a segment at the end of the show entitled "Shrink That Tune," and we're going to shrink a very popular song. So stay tuned. So communication, I think, is a real big thing for any of us. Even if we did a show sometime back on self-talk, right? I mean, we communicate with ourselves all the time, right? And
right.
Over we see conflict arise from communication breakdowns, whether it's between couples, coworkers, families, or even countries. And I know we've talked about, globally in terms of the fact things are more conflicted than ever. But you know what? In working to understand communication, it seems to always come down to relinquishing blame, stopping assumptions, and learning new tools for healthy relating, active listening, negotiating with an eye-to-eye, win-to-win compromise, compassion with your partner's triggers or weaknesses, as well as your own, and good old-fashioned truth. Because it really boils down to when we communicate, we've got two choices in terms of situations. Either we can pour gasoline on the conversation, which really is a lot of fun, at least short term, or we can be interested in the truth and really take an interest in what the other person is saying. The one thing that I've learned myself in terms of communicating is we have two ears and one mouth. So we get a whole lot farther by listening than talking. And talking is not communicating.
So are we going to be talking tonight, Walt, or are we going to be communicating?
Well, sometimes talk is cheap, Dr. Judy.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're going to be communicating. And if you want to communicate with us, feel free to call in. And the number again, 323-843-2826. Okay.
And for those of you who are tuned in, we are giving away the Peaceful Healing Dialogue, which is a bridge technique to make sure that you stay interconnected with each other. Just forward us your email, and you will have one in your inbox.
It's all of one page. It's very practical. And if you just send the request to info@drjudywtf.com, we will shoot it right back at you. We got a couple of requests this last week, and one was from out of the country.
Yes, it was.
So thanks a lot for tuning in and listening.
And hopefully they're communicating better in the UK as a result of the Peaceful Healing Dialogue. That's really what the show is all about tonight, is how to have peaceful healing dialogue, or how to have peaceful healing dialogues, so that instead of breaking the connection, you can stay connected. And instead of staying suppressed, you can continue to express without blowing the connection.
Mm-hmm. Because I found a lot of communication in terms of it is not only to be understood. That doesn't mean that everybody has to agree, because if both of us agree on everything, one of us is unnecessary. So differences are what makes us unique and special, and have us have a relationship. So the issue is not really agreeing on everything, but being understood, where you're coming from. And one of the ways it's important to me is expectations. Mm-hmm. For example, read a story many moons ago of a husband that was sick, and he kept wanting his wife to bring him orange juice because it turned out that when he was sick as a kid, his mom would bring him orange juice, and he always felt better. The only problem is his wife had never met his mom.
And
So-
that she didn't know that that was
and she had no
his,
clue that would, make him really feel better. And it was
Yeah.
important to him. I mean, something very simple as that. So again, he had the expectation of something, but he'd never communicated that specific expectation to her. So therefore, she wasn't able to be sensitive enough to, bring him a simple glass of orange juice.
which could easily have been resolved.
Very easily. Yeah. And, it's little stuff like that, where to squeeze the toothpaste or who takes out the trash. But you know what? Their misunderstandings can obviously lead to breakups, because some couples may keep it all inside and avoid confrontation, but that does not make the relationship any healthier.
And just because you have a disagreement, it doesn't mean that that you're disconnected. People can agree to disagree, as you know, and I
Absolutely.
think what people most crave is to be understood. So not just to be agreed with, because if you understand my position and I understand your position and I'm getting you and you're getting me, and yet we have a different relationship to our positions, that's communication. Okay, and that's still a connection. It doesn't mean a disconnect. What a disconnect is when people get stuck in their, what I call their isms. And
Exactly.
and going back to the isms, this is a piece of the mind map that I created many years ago to heal human disconnect. And the mind map is a metaphorical tool. It's a matrix of information designed to take you from the problem, dismantle it, and to the solution. And we're going to talk about that in the context of communication. And Walt, if you have a moment just to put it up there so that people can see it.
And those of you that are listening either on Stitcher or from iTunes, you can pull it at our website, which is www.drjudywtf.com.
So if you look at panel number 4, we have what I term the isms. And one of the isms is, one of the ways that I use isms is kind of like an isolation ism or positioning. And so what happens in breakdown of communication is that there is no interconnection. If you look at panel number 7, interconnection is an exchange of information. And when we're positioning, when we stay very steeped in our own squat, in our own opinion, then we don't let the other person in. And that's a breakdown in communication.
Yes, walls do have a challenge, do make communicating a challenge.
Walls do? Yeah.
Yeah. Arguments, another issue in the levels of communication is arguments are part of every relationship, right? Again, sometimes quarrels are because of us being selfish and whatnot. But you know what? If you learn how to handle them with wisdom and plenty of love, faith, and patience, you can do real well, because communication is really a vital aspect of any healthy relationship, right?
Right.
Third is healthy relationship techniques, right? We're going to have disagreements as part of life, so you got to learn how to handle them. Okay. And fifth is couples must learn to understand, and we've just talked about that, better each other. Experts say there's 5 levels of communication. One is a level of acquaintance. Second is sharing of information. Third is sharing of ideas. Fourth, sharing of emotions, and then lastly is the gut level sharing. So.
And how's that different from emotions? That gut level sharing?
Gut levels probably is, the real deep emotional part.
Okay, where people have experiences together.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
It's more of a merging. Yes?
Yeah, it's
okay,
more
as
of
opposed to
merging.
just a sharing.
Right.
Uh-huh.
We're sharing more than just, bodily
Right, and
fluids.
we talked about this before, but a large part of communication is nonverbal. It's what we're doing with our hands, our face, our distance or our space. It's what we're doing in terms of eye contact, because going back to attachment theory, and I talk about this a lot, what it takes to have a healthy human psyche is connection in terms of eye contact with the baby. We're going back here into the first year of life. Eye contact, skin contact, breastfeeding, attunement, unconditional love in the form of all of these active behaviors. And we're still, deep down inside, we're still babies. So if we don't get the eye contact, if we don't get that level of connection with another human being, it actually messes up our thinking.
Well, in some respects, we all are big babies anyway.
Always, right. And so when we talk about lines of communication and connection, what we're really replicating here is the original mother-infant disconnect or connect, and it still feels the same. When there's a connection, then there's a flow. When there's a flow between people, it facilitates a sense of trust.
Well, you're in sync as well.
Right. It facilitates creativity. It facilitates a sense of being attuned to. When there's disconnection, it's sort of like messing up our thinking because we are not being attuned to. So this all goes back to attachment theory, Walt. It's just that we're putting it in the context of being adults now and communicating on more sophisticated levels.
Well, if you want to be more sophisticated, then we're going to talk about an article about friendly fighting.
Friendly fighting?
Friendly fighting.
Well, let's hear it, Walt. How do you friendly fight?
Yeah. Friendly fight. I mean, listen, we're all going to have disagreements in a relationship, but the question is, you got to fight, not only fight fair, but friendly fighting, right?
Okay.
So for some people, this is truly a radical idea. There's no need to fight with your partner ever. Accusations, character assassination, threats, name-calling, cursing, yelling, whether developed at the top volume or quiet, sarcastic sneer, damage a relationship, and sometimes there is no going back. It's irrevocable.
Right. You can't suck back those words.
No, it's like trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
Right.
So nobody needs to be a monster or to be treated monsterly. And nobody who yells will ever be heard. In one heat of the moment, it's always a choice whether to go for a run or run your partner down.
I just want to make a point about that. When we go into that emotional state, that's really more of a reactive state, then what stands out is not what's being said, but what stands out is the style. So, Walt, as you were saying, when you're yelling, what's being heard is the yelling and not the communication.
Right. It's how you're saying it, not what you're saying.
And more, there's research to show that the limbic system, which is the emotional brain and the brain that absorbs trauma, if we're activating the limbic system and the emotional brain, then we're really not able to stay in our logic because we're just being jutted out. We're just being bumped out from our ability to stay centered, focused, and calm because these activations, again, they mess up our thinking. So it's really, really important that that the style of communication is peaceful. The style of communication stays connected. The style of communication is not an activation of blaming. Okay, so here are the rules. No blaming, no shaming, no criticizing, no judging.
Absolutely.
And so we might as well not talk. No, just kidding.
Right, we should only communicate.
Exactly.
Not talk.
There goes 90% of our conversation right there.
And if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's a passionate relationship, which I hope it is, then obviously in many cases, there's bound to be challenges in that situation, right? And so you're going to be passionate about your communicating, which means, of course, you're going to argue and fight. But, and of course, we can kiss and make up later, but it's no fun in the meantime. So the friendly fighting is actually an art. So we're working out together to support each other and staying close, even though we may have differences. Okay? So there are 10 rules. And again, if you want this, you can write us at info@Dr. Judy WTF, and we'll be happy to send it to you. First is embrace conflict. Right?
It's going to be there.
Conflict is normal and natural.
Right.
And it's how, sometimes we do communicate and how we do express our expectations. It's just going to happen. So don't be afraid of it. Just, hey, okay, good, let's get down to it. Number 2, go after the issue, not each other.
That's a great point.
Okay, right.
Yes.
I mean, how many of us, well, you've been this and you've been that. No, right? That doesn't work. You go after the issue. So friendly fighting sticks with the issue, namely, neither party resorts to name-calling or character assassination. It's each deal with the problem without adding the new problem of hurting each other's feelings. I know it's easier said than done, but that's really what the issue is. It's not assassinating each other.
And here's a reason why to go after the issue, not the person, is because when you use the you word, you're pointing the finger at that person. And what happens when you point the finger, the person is going to get defensive. What happens when we get defensive is we close down our ability to take in. And so if you want to assure that the person's not going to take you in, then you can try to put them on the defensive, and then you will see that your communication is kind of like Teflon. It'll just go toward the person, and you'll just see that there's just no entry, and then there's no connection, and there's no ability to really get each other and hear each other.
Third is listen respectfully. Okay, you got to hear them out. Right? If there's a disagreement, find out what it is. So acknowledge their feelings, and it means that never telling someone that he or she should feel a specific way. You want to come to an understanding. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but at least understand where each of them are coming from.
One of the things that I love about that particular way of being with each other is that you're not there to change another human being. You're not there to convince another human being, unless you're an attorney and you're trying to convince a jury, right? But what you're doing is you're sharing your experience with the other person, and then they get to tune into you and listen to your own personal experience of their world. And through that, we get empathy. And through that, we get connection. And through that, we get to exercise our humanity, if you will.
Well, and actually learn from each other.
That's right.
And have something that's actually real, right?
Right.
And we've kind of alluded to the fourth one about the 10 ways to fight fair is to talk softly. The louder someone yells, the less likely they are to be heard. Okay? So again, you need to focus on the issues and not how you're delivering it, because it's not going to be heard anyway.
I do a lot of couples counseling, and one of the things that I find in my work with couples is that when the yelling begins, that is when the limbic system, or the emotional primitive brain, gets activated, and that's when one of the parties will shut down, and that's where it just has to end, at least temporarily, because once that limbic system is activated, the person regresses, and it's sort of like, now you're not talking to an adult, you're talking to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. So at that point, you've just got to stop, and you've got to deal with the hurt and take a break.
It doesn't, and whatever the issue is you were trying to communicate breaks down. I mean, the reptilian in us goes back to real basics, and it's not helpful. I read one article that if you really find someone who's yelling, or you're both yelling consistently, then you need to put yourselves in a situation or a place where you can't yell. Go to a public place. Maybe you want to sit down on a bench in a mall, or you want to go to the park, or in a real extreme example, go to the library.
Oh, okay. That's a good behavior modification kind of a
go to the library
technique, because then you have to really watch your tone. You're forced. Exactly.
Not yell.
Yes.
Right, or raise your voice. I thought that was kind of an interesting analogy. It's like, okay, go to the library.
Yeah. Right.
Fifth is get curious, not defensive, right? Be a little scientist, be curious, because, defending yourself is, whether vehemently or not, is just tough. So ask for more information, ask for details. There are usually some basis for a person's complaint. So when you meet a complaint with curiosity, you are making a lot of room for understanding. Hey, I didn't know about that about you, or can you tell me more about that? I'm not sure I get it, and you're talking about the issue, not about the individual.
And when you're a listener, it's actually harder, because the tendency is to jump in and interrupt and be reactive to what's being said. But if you just shut up long enough, then you may be able to truly understand that other person's world. And by not being defensive, you make space for that other person to reveal more about what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing within themselves and between the two of you. And so it's actually more difficult to be a listener because you've got to really, really shut all of your tendencies to interrupt.
To react.
And react.
Again, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And what comes to mind is you might want to go back a couple of weeks in a show we did on emotional bullies. And literally almost half, it's like 49% of everybody at work has encountered an emotional bully. And my view on that is those are the ones that admit or even are aware of what an emotional bully is or does. So, that, again, isn't spur any unity in any relationship either, whether it's at work or at home.
And that's where communication is not really communication. It's manipulation. It's using your words to push and shove and threaten and checkmate people. And that's another way of using words. And it's not peaceful, it's not healing, and it's not intimate.
So again, we're listening to Dr. Judy WTF, which is What the Freud. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, and with Dr. Judy in studio, and we are talking about the 10 rules for fighting fair. And the sponsor this hour of our show is the Psychological Healing Center. So if you get your mind mapped, you definitely will have your life changed. So you can go to our website, www.drjudywtf.com, to learn more.
And one of the things that I find in my practice is that people blueprint off of their family of origin, and it's very multi-generational.
Yes,
Today I was mapping out the cause of one of my patients' depression, actually, and what I found is that what was going on in the backdrop was a lot of trauma, not only in his generation, but in his past generation. And this all trickles down. There's a psychiatrist who's no longer alive by the name of Murray Bowen, and he talks about the multi-generational transmission process. And what happens is that through each generation, we are experiencing the fallout of the last generation and the generation before that, and it all trickles down and lands on
us.
In us.
It snowballs.
Right. And although I've talked about this a lot, I want to repeat that we are not the cause of part one of our lives. We are absolutely not the cause. As babies, we are sponges. We are permeable membranes. We soak in the information. We soak in the emotions. We soak everything in, and we have no boundaries. We're not supposed to have boundaries because we're trying to soak in the world. Now, if we're violated during that period of time, if we don't have safe parents, then what happens is we're really absorbing poison, emotional poison, so to speak. And so as a result of that, our lens on the look of life gets cracked. And so what happens later on in our communication is everything gets distorted because we start seeing people as, for example, threatening to us. We may start seeing people as hurting our egos. We may start seeing people as, in general, unsafe, and then we're not open. We're not open to interconnecting because we're defending.
We're looking through that lens.
Correct.
And we're interpreting everything from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, again, it's magnified and snowballs.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you want good communication, then a part of it is to take responsibility for cleaning out the old blueprints of the past so that you can be now free from the multi-generational transmission and clear that slate so that you can reboot your system and start really being open again to connecting.
We are going through the 10 rules of fighting fair, or friendly fighting, and we are on number 6, which dovetails from a previous one, which is, of course, get curious, not defensive. Ask for specifics. How many times have you been in an argument where somebody makes this amazingly global, broad statement, and you're thinking, huh? Right? And so, the reason to ask for specifics is that global statements may include words like always and never, and they never get anywhere and are not true. So you want to ask for examples, and you are not trying to be defensive in asking for examples, even though, or proof, if you will. It's, hey, okay, I do that. Well, where? Give me an example. What do you mean? And the other person is either going to say, well, just last week you blah, 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 or they aren't going to be coming up with one, which means they're just trying to pour gasoline on the conversation, and there really isn't any merit or weight on that accusation, if you will. And that just adds more damage, but you're able to diffuse it, and then you can move on.
When you notice in your conversation that there's this splitting in the languaging, you're always, you're never, then right there you know that you need to stop the conversation. That should be a red flag to you to stop, because rarely is there a never or rarely is there an always. And those positionings automatically are disconnects, because it's not an example of really wanting to know your partner's point of view or inner world, or to communicate to your partner what's really hurting you on a feeling level. You never, you always is more of a blame and an accusation. And again, if you learn to talk the language of disconnect, this process becomes very, very obvious. Many times I'll sit with couples and I'll turn to them and I'll say, so what you just said to your partner, is that a disconnect or is that a connect? And then right away they have to identify that. And it just makes it really clean and really simple, because the object is that we are wired to connect. We want to be connected. And even though we're in the heat of an argument, the truth is we want to be understood. So let's just bring that into our consciousness, is that is really our true desire.
Because you know what, Judy? I have told you 50 million times not to exaggerate.
I thought it was 51 million times, actually.
Maybe it has been long enough. It's been 51 million.
Okay, I'm just beginning to hear you, though. Because I'm a good listener.
Absolutely. Most indubitably. So number 7 is find points of agreement, right? I mean, this is really true in negotiations, and that's what kind of communication in this sense is. There are always some parts of a conflict that can be points of agreement, common ground, no matter how small. I mean, it doesn't have to be 50-50. It can be even 80-20, right? There is at least that 20% that's common. That's a really good start. So remember, common ground does most often lead to a common solution.
And if you go to panel number 7 of my mind map, you will see the common ground. I remember back in elementary school, I always loved those concentric overlapping circles, and they meant to me the common ground. And that's why I use this in the panel 7 diagram, is that when we have common ground, then we're basically enhancing each other. And it's something we're synergizing.
It's something to build on.
Yeah, we're synergizing, and we're enhancing the light. For example, if you take a magnifying glass, right, and you have your magnifying glass focus on something, and there's a sunbeam going through the magnifying glass, it's focused heat. So if you're focusing on the commonality, it's bringing light. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to burn yourself in this case, okay? But again, what you're doing is you're bringing more light to the situation, and more ability to really feel that there's a connection between the two of you, and you build on that. You don't build on the disconnections, you build on the connections.
Another way of looking at this is you're focusing on your strengths in each other, as opposed to attempting to overcome your weakness, because we're always going to have weaknesses, and they are what they are, and the chances are they're always going to be what they are. But if we've got a strength and it's a common ground, then again we can latch onto that, tie a knot at the end of the rope, and try and build on that.
And I talk a lot about this. I know we've talked about this on other episodes, where 1 and 1 sometimes is more than 2. It's a 3 concept, in that if your creativity plus my creativity get together, then a third entity is born that is bigger than us. And I know that when we concentrate on something that's of a higher purpose, than who we are individually. Like, for example, in a relationship, sometimes the higher purpose is that you're together and a lot of people rely on you, and you've got family and you've got children and so on. And so sometimes rather than going micro on your situation, you can get a little bit more global about it and understand that you have reason to preserve the relationship and reason to clear this communication up, because a lot of people are indirectly or directly involved in your continuing to stay together and continuing to build together.
Absolutely. And number 8 is look for options. I mean, you got to sometimes be a detective and look for options. Fighting ends when cooperation begins. Again, trying to find that common ground for common solutions. Asking politely for some suggestions or alternatives invites collaboration. So that's always a good thing. Number 9 in friendly fighting is make concessions, right? Any relationship always involves compromising. This isn't not a, and that way it really does boil down to a win-win. We're not here looking for a win-lose, but if you compromise a little bit, you give a little bit, they're going to give a little bit. They see you're serious, you're willing to, make a little concession. Boom. If you give a little, it makes room for the other person to make concessions. And again, small concessions can lead to larger compromises. This is where it was. Compromises doesn't have to mean you're meeting each other 50-50. It could be 60-40 or 80-20. Again, you're back to your common ground.
And it doesn't mean that you're losing yourself in the process.
No, and it isn't about keeping score either.
No.
It's finding a solution.
Yes.
That's workable for both of you guys, right?
Yeah.
And number 10 in friendly fighting is make peace, right? Some issue wasn't really important enough for you guys to lose sleep over it. The inevitable conflict that comes up with living another person, there's always going to be something. So, you just want to make peace. I mean, there was one article that a couple promised they've been married 69 years.
I love that example.
Yeah. And they promised that when they got early on in their marriage, like really early, they said, we're not going to let the sun go down on anything. They're not going to go to bed mad. And sometimes they were up late. And sometimes they realized they were up late doing the discussions and whatnot, and then they realized that it wasn't worth losing any more sleep over it, so they went to bed.
And everything starts with consciousness. So when you enter a relationship, whether it be a marriage or friendship or any kind of relationship, and you come from the consciousness of really staying connected and interconnected like this couple did. They came from the consciousness of resolution. Okay, so their dedication was to make sure that every night they completed on their commitment to each other, and they fulfilled on it. And so that was really the leading consciousness that continued to flow through the relationship and make sure that they were going to keep the flow going by resolving every evening on whatever was blocking them, getting in their way.
Yep. So, and we've kind of introduced this, but we're going to delve in pretty quickly here on you guys getting your PhD in communication, which is your peaceful healing dialogue. And you can ask for this by writing us. You can go on Facebook. We're on Facebook and Twitter. You can make an inquiry there. Where it's Dr. Judy WTF, or you can write us, drjudywtf.com, info@drjudywtf. And so the first thing is always respect each other. Right? I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but it's good to, lay the groundwork in that.
And
about respect.
Well, by that I mean that if you're going to enter into discussion with somebody and it's a delicate matter, it's always a good idea to get your timing right and to make sure that the person is receptive to what you're going to say. So it's a great idea to respectfully say, hey, Walt, do you have a few minutes right now? Is this a good time to talk about what happened yesterday over lunch? And then it's up to the person to say yay or nay. And if they say no, then you might just back off and say, okay, let me know when it's a good time. And I'd love to address that. So it's being respectful of the person. It's not just bombarding them with your pent up emotions whenever you want to.
The next one is be truthful, even when it hurts. Because again, that means you're vulnerable. And you're willing to, go the extra mile, and it always pays off.
And when I say truthful, when we're saying truthful, we don't mean hurtful truthful.
Right.
Again, no
Right.
demeaning, devaluing, destroying,
Right.
criticizing, but just shining the truth light from your perspective and saying the truth is that hurt my feelings. The truth is when you say that or do that, it really makes me angry. And the truth is, and who can argue with somebody's truth? You're just sharing your truth.
Yes, and then and along those lines, always give the other person honest, rigorous feedback.
And this is the most done communication that I know of. People are scared. They're really, really scared to give feedback to the other person. Now, again, I'm not saying unsolicited advice. I'm not saying barrage the person with, you're fat, you're ugly, and your hair sucks kind of truths. I'm just saying that we all need feedback because we have blind spots.
We do.
And so that we all have to be in this together because ultimately we're each other's feedback mechanism, biofeedback mechanism, and so we're also here to shine truth lights so that we can grow together. We can grow, and that's the only way I know of how to expose a blind spot is by shining a truth light on that blind spot.
And on all those lines, always include self-reflection, which really means owning my own stuff.
Right. Another rare commodity.
Yep.
Rarely will people say, and self-reflecting on that, I can now see my part in what happened the other day.
Well,
and
that's
really
that's taking responsibility.
Yes.
Yee.
Right.
Next is offer solutions on how to make things better. And we've talked about that. Even if it's 80-20, that's still working on a common ground for solution. Keep each other interconnected, not disconnected. And that's a conscious effort and a conscious decision.
And again, watch your tone, watch your style, make sure that you've got eye contact with the person, make sure that you don't have cell phones interfering with that line of communication because you're going to cut it right there.
And don't raise your voice.
Thank you. Yeah.
Offer the other a chance to address the issue that have caused a disconnect. Again, we've already talked about the fact that it's about the issue, not about the individual or the character of the individual. It's about the issue, okay? Extend a bridge back to one another. Again, that's making a compromise or a concession. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength.
And it's also saying that you're more important than the issue. You as a human being are more important. So let's first get connected, and then we can talk about the issue because we're here to really here to go forward with each other and not break this.
And along those lines again, to be ethical, transparent, and vulnerable. We've talked about that as well. It'll go far. Again, along those lines is being truthful when it hurts and being responsible and owning your own stuff. Renegotiate or reshuffle the old system by updating your files.
It's a huge one because what happens is in the course of life we get to grow, and when we grow, we're morphing out of what I call our old self, our old limited self, and sometimes along this process we shed many core beliefs and primary core beliefs, negative core beliefs that hurt us. And so in this process, as we reshuffle our old files, it also impacts the system of our relationships. And so sometimes who we've been being is no longer operational. And so we've got to help people to understand that we've morphed. And so as a result of our morph, the system's morphed. And as a result of that, the rules and the roles have changed here. And so we've got to update all of that stuff.
Yes, because it's in a relationship, and if you're in it for the long haul, things are going to change. Your interests are going to change.
Right.
Whether you're in your 20s and you're not the same person you are in your 40s when you are in your 60s. I mean, you want to grow together, right?
Yes.
Be kind and compassionate even when both partners don't agree.
Yeah, that's just a given. Just whatever it is.
We're not going to agree on everything.
Yeah, and just be humane about it. There's no point in going through a communication with another human being and losing our humanity in the process. We always get to keep that.
And then a couple more. Be gently sharing with one another that the relationship is not working.
If it's not. Right.
If it's
So,
not.
like I ask this question a lot in my work with couples. How many deals does it take? How many deal breakers does it take to break a deal?
It's a good question.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a business person, we know that it only takes one. Okay. If you've got a contract and in the contract there's one deal breaker, that's the definition of a deal breaker. It breaks the deal.
That's it.
And so if you're in a relationship and one of the parties broke the deal, really broke the deal to the point where they have really cut the connection. Hopefully in therapy and marital counseling and couples counseling, you can still work through things and you don't just keep casually throwing away relationships. And there's a lot behind acting out in this way. But sometimes people really, really majorly break the deal. And at that point, it's important to work through the disconnect so that you can have a peaceful, healing departure if you must, or peaceful, healing divorce if you must.
Versus a peaceful, healing delight. Right?
Which is when you don't have to have the peaceful, healing departures and divorces.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And then both partners must work on interconnection, reconnection, and unity, knowing that ultimately it could lead to either a unity or a disconnection of some form.
Right, and a very important point is that relationships begin to weaken, then fail when we stop doing the things that it took to get them in the first place. So often couples will turn to me and say, well, she used to be this way and he used to be this way. And then in exploring what was going on then, I find out that at the beginning, they really took the time to sit together. At the beginning, they really heard each other. At the beginning, they were cooperating. And then, the usual, he bought me flowers when we were first courting. And, oh, she made me my favorite meal, And when we stop doing these kinds of things and we get into resentments, then we're actually ruining the elements that got us so excited and happy to be with each other in the first place.
I mean, if you're at the point, guys, where you used to bring flowers home for no reason, and you haven't done it for quite a while, and now you can't bring flowers home. And the reason why you can't is because the minute you show up at that front door with a bouquet of flowers in your hand, what is she going to say? Okay, what did you do? Right?
Right. Don't they have songs about that?
Yeah,
you don't bring me flowers
you don't bring
anymore.
Me flowers anymore. Barbra Streisand.
Right.
But the point is, if that's the point where you haven't brought flowers home, and now there's suspicion because you're bringing flowers home, you haven't brought enough flowers home recently.
And I know it's a very simple thing, and I'm kind of using it metaphorically, but I hope you know what I mean by flowers. Whatever that means to the other human being that really pleases them, that makes them feel important and cherished and respected, and whatever that is. And so, really, it's a lot cheaper to do those little things. Think about it this way: it's a lot cheaper to go through, just do the little things that please your partner than to go through a drastic thing like a divorce or even a breakup or any form of dissolution of a relationship.
If you can't afford flowers, what's always fun is get a small pack of Post-it notes. And write about 10 things on each Post-it note, and then put them places where your partner's going to find them. Yeah. Whether they're in their shoes, and on the toothpaste in the drawer, in the refrigerator, just different places they're going to find them. Maybe you make them lunch or put it in their briefcase. Some simple thing.
And the toothpaste note shouldn't be saying don't
no,
leave
stuff
the cap
like,
off.
I love you, I miss you already. You're the best, you're sexy, you're beautiful. I love how you taste. Whatever. And just a couple little phrases and one-liners. Maybe you guys have your own language. I guarantee you, miles and miles and miles of will work magic.
And I don't know what the ratio is, but this has been talked about in the literature that when you're in a relationship and you have 5 esteeming comments versus, say,
well,
I don't know.
5 to 1.
5 to 1.
Yeah,
okay?
one negative.
One negative, then that's still preservational of the relationship. But when you keep tearing it down and demeaning and devaluing and destroying, you keep eating away at the fiber of that connection, then what do you expect, right? It's going to go into disconnection and then a defense and ultimately a breakdown and ultimately a peaceful healing, a not so healing departure, divorce,
and
disconnect.
That is it for us. We now have to depart and divide into our song that we're going to shrink this go around, and it's a song entitled "Enjoy the Silence." It's by Depeche Mode. We went back to the Depeche Mode, one of my favorite groups. So I'm going to read the words, and Judy's going to interpret it through the mind map, and of course her over 20 years of experience as a therapist. Words like violence break the silence, come crashing into my little world, painful to me, pierce right through me. Can't you understand, oh my little girl?
So the words are just like weapons here. I like the reference of the words to violence, and they can be so piercing and so devastating. We talked a lot about narcissism and narcissistic injury. So when we demean and devalue people, it breaks through our protective shell and causes us pain and pierces right through us, especially when our defenses are not very strong.
Or they know us so well they can push that button.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Because words, sticks and stones can hurt me, but words can never. Sticks and stones break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Not true, of course. We all know that. I mean, there's even emotional bullying, as we talked about online, right? All you're doing is you're reading words of somebody said to you, and you're interpreting them, and so even that can be extremely painful.
Yes.
All I ever wanted, all I ever needed is here in my arms. Words are very unnecessary. They can only do harm.
Well, this is almost like going back to pre-verbal times when it's all about the touch. It's all about really the pre-verbal, the non-verbal level of communication. And especially when we've been injured emotionally, we turn into the little girl or the little boy. That's the regression. And then there's the sense, especially for people who have been verbally abused, that the words are unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but maybe even unwanted in some cases. And really, they just want the healing touch. That's all. Just don't barrage me with any possible negative comments. Keep me safe. Just keep me connected with your touch.
Vows are spoken to be broken. Feelings are intense. Words are trivial. Pleasures remain, so does the pain. Words are meaningless and forgettable.
Well, here we're talking about trust, okay? So something was promised in a contract, in a spoken word, keep your word, and then broken and generating very intense feelings. And here the person's kind of trying to trivialize words. At first, the person was saying words are like weapons, and now words are trivial.
Right.
And so words are meaningless and forgettable. We don't think so, right?
Absolutely
They
not.
just penetrate through, and you can't suck them back.
No, you can. And words, it's not only words, but we've learned how the words are spoken. And that has a big deal as well. I mean, if you're talking, or how they're delivered. If you're talking to somebody with your arms crossed and yelling at them, and you say the exact same phrase in a loving format, and with your arms open, it's going to have a different meaning.
Right. It's got to be congruent, right?
Congruent.
I love you. I mean, that's not when you're saying something, it's got to align with your body language, with your facial expression. It's all about all the levels of communication.
Absolutely. And lastly, all I ever wanted, all I ever needed is here in my arms. Words are very unnecessary. They can only do harm.
Well, clearly from a person who was injured by words, and now they need the soothing touch to just to piece that over, so to speak.
Yep.
To heal that over.
That's our show. So that is our show, and now we're going to play the song. You can catch us on Stitcher, either on your smartphone or online. You can search for Dr. Judy WTF, or on iTunes, and of course here at UBN Radio, of our former shows. Thanks so much for listening. We are one of the top-rated shows here at UBN, and it's a thrill and a privilege to be here every week, and we'll be here next week for another installment of Dr. Judy WTF. And if you want anything we've discussed here, or you have a question, query, comment, song to shrink, or a show that we might want to do, just write us. We read everything that comes in at drjudy info@drjudywtf.com. So with that, God bless everyone, and take care till next week.